Hi everyone, welcome back. It's another episode of Spectator Sports, episode 71. This is Sebastian Fonseca, your host, always here. Before we get started with the episode, we got to do some housekeeping. You guys know what to do. If you're new, like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Take a look at our Instagram and TikTok pages. You can get the audio from this episode on Spotify, and also a playlist has been made on the 2023 NFL season. You can get clips as well. All links are in the description. Some breaking news coming out of the NBA where we see Damian Lillard being traded to the Milwaukee Bucs. And it seemed like a foregone conclusion in this offseason that he's going to end up with the Miami Heat. He dropped numerous hints on social media, and he has a pretty good relationship with Jimmy Butler as well. And Pat Riley usually gets these deals done. But the Blazers really didn't like the package that Miami was giving them, centered around Tyler Hero. That's not a lot of return for the value that you're giving up in Damian Lillard. And the Bucs played the waiting game, and they ended up winning the whole Damian Lillard sweepstakes, despite rumors that the Toronto Raptors may have been the front runners up until this week, and then Miami was potentially his preferred destination. I get it. You have Heat culture, and you also have no state income tax. We love that. But Milwaukee is going to give him the best situation and the best opportunity to win a championship. To talk about how this deal went down, and the Blazers get a pretty decent package. Now, they brought in Phoenix as well, and Phoenix also needed some help. So I think everybody gets a little bit of a winning piece of the pie here, where Milwaukee gets Damian Lillard. Then you get the Blazers, who are now in a full rebuild, so they get a nice center in DeAndre Ayton from the Phoenix Suns. You get Jrue Holiday, who will most likely be traded by the season beginning because I don't see him staying around. He wants to be on a contending team. And it would be a great trade asset for the Portland Trail Blazers to get more assets back as a later domino effect of this original three-team trade. Now, Phoenix, we always talk about their depth issues behind KD, Booker, and now still with Bradley Beal in there, it's very top heavy, but now you get some other pieces. You get Yusuf Nurkic, a pretty solid big man that still can give you a double-double here and there, and then Grayson Allen, who is a tough bench player. He can give you a little bit of shooting as well, we've seen with the Milwaukee Bucks. So I think overall, pretty decent for all three teams. But now let's talk about the X's and O's, or schematically what the Bucs can do. The Bucs now have probably the best two-man game in the entire NBA between Damian Lillard and Giannis Antetokounmpo. Dame has the license that very few players have in the NBA. I think maybe outside of Steph, he has the deepest range out of any active NBA player, and we've seen him drop numerous bombs from deep, 30-foot plus, and very good in clutch time situations, something that this Bucs team hasn't been the greatest at, especially last season, when countless times against the Miami Heat, they failed to come and close the deal, especially with Giannis. Giannis has been a liability at the free throw line, and I like him to get the ball late, but he has to make those shots. But when he's fouled a lot, Dame can make up for that. He can make those free throws, and he can also just demand the ball in late game situations. So you give up some defense with Jrue Holiday, who is probably the best two-way point guard in this league, but you get so much more offense. I mean, even in limited amounts, Dame didn't play an entire season, but he had 32 points a game last year, and I don't think he's going to get up to that clip, but definitely 25 from Dame is going to be excellent. That's going to be far more than what you get from Jrue Holiday in recent memory. And Chris Middleton has dropped off since they won the championship 2 years ago as well. So this will make up. Now, Chris Middleton, Brook Lopez, they can kind of take a little bit more of a step back, and it's a nice core. I mean, they have some role players that they were able to maintain in this offseason, and I really like what Milwaukee has done. They still have to go through Boston and Miami probably in the playoffs, but they are definitely going to be favorites in the East, if not the whole thing. I can't remember a team that had such a poor week in terms of PR than the Chicago Bears did last week. Justin Fields had a poor game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We all saw that. Just missed some reads, had some crucial turnovers as well. And he is not looking like he used to, at least in year 2, where he was playing a little bit more loose, free. And yes, there was limitations with the passing offense, but the running game was there. Now we're not seeing him run as much. We're seeing a lot of pockets collapsing and whatnot. Then you have him calling out the coaching staff, which is, I think, sort of in bounds given how it's looked so far, but then also he has to go out on the field and make some reads, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Then the GM, Ryan Poles, has to step in to defend the coaching staff. Then you have Justin Fields coming in a little bit later trying to say that he is not calling out the coaching staff. It starts with him. I think that's a good way to clean up, but the damage was already kind of done. We, as the media, already had a field day processing his quotes. Plus, then later in the week, you hear that Alan Williams, their defensive coordinator, tendered his letter of resignation. And there was a rumor on X that him and somebody in the ownership in the Chicago Bears had their homes raided by the FBI. Now that, thankfully, was a rumor, proved to not be true, so that isn't there. But still, it's out there. It's a weird vibe with the Chicago Bears. Still, you have a defensive coordinator that left your team abruptly. We don't know all the details about that. And then you had Soldier Field broken into by random people on the streets of Chicago. Just a really rough week. And let's just dissect first the play of Justin Fields, right? Justin Fields, they made the moves, they got DJ Moore, and we're thinking this is the leap that he needs to make to prove himself in the NFL. We saw that with Jalen Hurts once they got him some adequate receiving help like Devontae Smith, like A.J. Brown, and he blossomed in year 3 especially. Now, DJ Moore is no A.J. Brown, but he's still a very good receiver, and we're expecting the surrounding cast as well to elevate. And it's not looking good for Justin Fields so far. There are turnovers, there are just misreads. He's taking too long to get rid of the ball. That's leading to sacks. He has been sacked the most amount of times by anybody in the NFL through 3 weeks. And it's not looking good for the coaching staff either. Remember that when Justin Fields started off, he was under coach Matt Nagy, and this comes back to ownership giving Matt Nagy an extra year. You go with the offensive coach, you try to redeem him for all the Mitch Trubisky stuff. New quarterback there. Doesn't really work. Matt Nagy is out. Bring in Matt Eberflus, and I think this is when the issues started to come up. I think Matt Eberflus, solid defensive coordinator. He had a pretty good program on the defensive side when he was in Indianapolis. But you have to look at the analytics and the modern NFL, right? Chicago's whole culture in terms of football has been based around the defensive end. Yes, we know about the 85 Bears. They will not stop talking about the 85 Bears. Mike Ditka, Mike Singletary, all those defensive stalwarts there. That is one of the best, if not the best defense of all time. That's awesome. But look at their all-time leaders on the offensive side. They only have one receiver above 5,000 yards receiving in their entire franchise history. Jay Cutler, he is their leading passing yards leader. He's their leading passing touchdowns leader of all time in Chicago history. That's a very low ceiling, especially for the modern NFL. There are just so many things fundamentally wrong with the Chicago Bears. They are embracing these old defensive tactics. They brought in Bill Polian, who, let's face it, I mean, he is also another dinosaur in the NFL. He is a consultant for the Chicago Bears, and we know that his track record is anti-running quarterbacks. He was talking about how Lamar Jackson should switch to receiver or some other position other than quarterback. Proven wrong. Lamar won an MVP. We've seen this also with Justin Fields. Now, he wasn't the biggest fan, and by his recommendation, they got Matt Eberflus as their head coach, defensive-minded guy. Now, his calling card, the defense, has been not so good. Even in year 2, with some added pieces, it's still not a good product on the field. Offensively, the coaching staff looks lost. I mean, you're hearing players on the defensive end in these inside the NFL clips when players are mic'd up. Defensive players on the Bucs side are saying, DJ Moore, they're not using you right. And he's over here saying on the mic, saying, tell me about it. I think that's safe to say there are a lot of problems in Chicago, and we're wasting the time of Justin Fields. His development is being stunted. Yes, I know that his play hasn't been great, and they helped him out. But it also comes down to coaching. And I was worried when he was drafted by the Chicago Bears. It's a nice, flashy move, but we know that Chicago isn't good with nurturing quarterbacks. I mean, their Super Bowl runs have been with game managers, Jim McMahon and Rex Grossman, for crying out loud. They're not known to nurture and develop quarterbacks. They're not known to be innovative on the offensive side. And even defensively, I mean, a couple of times you see maybe some reincarnations of the monsters of the Midway, like with Brian Urlacher's Chicago Bears defenses, or you've seen when Khalil Mack was there. But that's a very short amount of time. And it's only led to so much success in Chicago. Chicago really needs to look themselves in the mirror. I think right now, with all these moves, they just look like still the worst team in the NFL, and they were picking first last year. They may be on the clock yet again once the season comes to an end. There's still time to right these wrongs. But 0-3 right now after they face the Kansas City Chiefs, which is obviously a given. They were never going to beat the Kansas City Chiefs. But not even to look competitive is a very, very bad sign. And to not even look competitive is a very poor sign of how this team is looking so far. So my advice for Chicago is to evolve into the 21st century or simply go extinct. The Miami Dolphins look like a freaking track team. I mean, I have not seen a team that is simply this fast on the perimeter. We know about Tyreek Hill. He's the freaking cheetah. We know about Raheem Mostert, former track star. We know about Jalen Waddle, another speedy guy. Now they just unleash Devin A-Chain. Hell of a name, firstly, but this whole team has accumulated over 700 yards of offense and then 70 points. 70! I haven't even seen a team go past 60 since 2010. And now a team just scored 10 touchdowns in an NFL game. And that's something that, you see like these SEC teams beat up on these no-name schools early on in the season. They're just the cupcake games to get those teams started for the college football season. But this is the NFL. To get 70 hung on your head is freaking embarrassing. And yes, the Broncos are not the same team as they historically have been defensively, but let's have some pride, guys. There are some players on that defensive end, and they were just getting outpaced. I know Miami is fast. I know you're playing in the heat of South Beach on a September day, but this just looked like quit. Yes, Russell Wilson, very problematic in his play in his time in Denver, but this isn't even on him. He actually was okay. His defense didn't even give him a chance. And this comes back to Sean Payton. Sean Payton was here to resurrect the Denver Broncos and fix Russell Wilson. He didn't want to take questions. He was embarrassed. I get it. But when you were running up the score, for example, in 2018 against the Philadelphia Eagles, you were stunning, right? You were happy. You were jolly. You got to take the heat when it goes your way, too. I know you're not a defensive guy, but you are the head coach. Anything about the team is associated with your name. It's just not looking good for the Denver Broncos. They just got embarrassed 70-20. Lost by 50 points. And with Russell Wilson, this is not even entirely his fault, but it just seems like the way this season is going. If he were to have another string of bad games, I think he could be benched. I think he could be on his way out. Because the new ownership, they seem tied with Sean Payton. That's, I think, a given. You don't just hire Sean Payton. You also don't trade for Sean Payton from the New Orleans Saints to Denver for just a one-year gig. You did that with Nathaniel Hackett. That didn't go well. It seems that Russ, unfortunately, now, I thought last year Nathaniel Hackett was the scapegoat, and now maybe might be the other way around now with Sean staying and Russell Wilson leaving. But it's just looking really bleak out in Denver right now. I mean, there were at least some hope. Like, you think maybe you'd be 1-2, 2-1 at this point, but this could get really bad. I mean, I talked about Chicago being bad, but at least, they're not getting outscored by 50 points. That's a whole nother thing. It's also funny too, because Sean Payton was the guy that came into the season and roasted Nathaniel Hackett. I think, yeah, Nathaniel Hackett wasn't that great, but he wasn't blown out like this. There was maybe some mismanagement, right, with clock situations, and that was his first time head coaching gig too. Sean Payton has won a Super Bowl in New Orleans. He's been at this for a while. He only took a break for 1 year, so let's not coddle him. It's also on Sean Payton. He should get a lot of the blame for what's going on in Denver right now. But let's go to the other side. Let's be positive here now, right? Miami, they look like a freaking track team, like I said. You unveil Devin Achane, who had over 200 yards rushing and just 18 carries. He had 4 touchdowns. And if they're outpacing teams like this, I just don't know who has a defense that can run with these guys. The only thing that could potentially stop them or slow them down remotely is inclement weather. Right now, Miami has the inside track to get the number 1 overall seed in the AFC, which means they don't have to travel, which is good for them, because if they were to go to Kansas City in the winter, if they were to go to Buffalo or any one of these teams that have wintry surfaces or wintry environments, they would face some difficulty because the traction is different. You can't play as fast, and then that means more ground and pound. But Florida is still pretty hot in December or January, so that's going to be an adjustment for maybe these more East Coast, northern-based teams. And Mike McDaniel, let's just give this man a round of applause. He's by far the coach of the year through 3 weeks. And he has Tua looking like an MVP, let's just face it. This team is loaded, they are stacked, they are very fast, and now they can prove they can run the rock. Last year, it was more like, okay, I got Tyreek, I got Jalen Waddle, I'm just going to pass to these guys. Now you got a running game, and you can also have Raheem Mostert kind of taking a break, which he did. You can have Devin Achane running around loose, and you still have Ahmed, you still have Jeff Wilson that could be coming back from an injury. So there is some depth at that running back position. They have wide receiving depth, even with Berrios. He's a solid slot receiver. Defensively, we're still waiting on Jalen Ramsey to come back. This team is scary. They have a lot to prove. It's 3 weeks. They got off to a hot start last year and kind of muddled through. And also it's based on Tua's health. Absolutely. This is just something I haven't seen before in the NFL. Put up 70 points. Unbelievable. The Los Angeles Chargers were able to squeak by the Minnesota Vikings in a battle of 2 0-2 squads. Now, both teams seem like copies of each other. They're very similar. They're sloppy. They have quarterbacks that are great at putting up stats, but they haven't really won a lot. And then you also have just teams that are very high-powered offenses as well. Not a lot of defense. And these are also reasons why they're winless, is the sloppiness. They're both turnover-prone. They're both mismanaged in clutch situations. And we saw that today. And that's kind of why both of these teams nearly lost this game. It was like, who really wants to win and get to 1-2? The Vikings had 2 crucial turnovers. And one lost them the game by Kirk Cousins throwing the ball into traffic, intercepted at the goal line, and that was it. We saw again the reckless Brandon Staley calling a very questionable 4th and 1 call inside their own 25-yard line. And you don't have Austin Eckler, and you're going short yardage. I think at that point, just throw the ball. Put it in Justin Herbert's hand. He's your franchise quarterback. They couldn't stop Keenan Allen all day. He tore up the Minnesota Vikings for 200 yards off 18 catches. This is just a mismanagement that we're seeing. And if they were to lose this, I actually think it would have been a blessing in disguise. We would have seen him get fired. And he's playing with fire. He's getting away with it. But again, the Spanos family has to really say, like, do we want this anymore? Because I'll say it again, they're wasting the prime of Justin Herbert. It was very touch and go. And yet again, there were times on defense where they were just undisciplined. They were not being consistent in getting stops, and that is your calling card, right? You are a defensive coach, and it hasn't translated despite a lot of talent. Let's face it, this defense on paper is stacked, but they're not getting it done on a consistent basis. Now, they've made plays to win, and that's something to be acknowledged, but I still have concerns. I don't think this is the Chargers figuring it out because they also lost Mike Williams. I told you last week he's historically been banged up, and I never wish injuries on anybody. Let's just make that clear. But now he's out for the year, what's confirmed to be a torn ACL. For a team that lacks big plays, yes, they got him, but now Mike Williams was a big part of that. They're going to have to find somebody else to be that because you can't force feed Keenan Allen on slants and curl routes and little crossing routes, little shallow crossers across the middle. They have to find a way to get vertically down the field, and we don't know how long Austin Eckler's out either. And for the Minnesota Vikings, now you're 0-3. Again, you're putting up great stats. You're looking pretty good offensively, but again, these are not translating to wins. This has been Kirk Cousins' career label. He is great at empty calories, but not a lot of winning. It's gonna pretty much sink their chances. I mean, it's very hard to come back from 0-3. I don't know what really the idea is. I mean, they have a lot of pieces. I'm not saying fire sale it just yet, but they could definitely just rip the Band-Aid and punt the season because it's going to be hard to dig yourself out from 0-3 just to even make the wild card at this point as the 7th seed. Imbalanced as the conferences are, the division, I think you can ship it. I mean, Detroit looks to be back on track. Even Green Bay looks pretty good. And between Chicago and Minnesota, yes, they're both 0-3, but you're not going to get a lot of wins based on the schedule and whatever else because they still have glaring flaws on that side. The Bills' defense had their best defensive performance in weeks. I mean, even dating back to last year. They had Sam Howell seeing ghost out there. 4 turnovers, 9 sacks, a pick 6, and this was a dominant performance in really poor conditions. Sam Howell had a pretty solid showing in his first 2 weeks. Now, he had some throws, that could have been intercepted, but he led the Commanders to a couple of comeback victories, and that's something to be acknowledged. But this time, they were completely shut down. This is another East Coast game that was impacted by the tropical storm that rolled up, Tropical Storm Ophelia. Ed Oliver just wrecked the game. I mean, he's a pretty solid defensive tackle that I don't think a lot of analysts really acknowledge, but he is very good and one of the few solid players that they have on that D-line. And once Von Miller gets back, that D-line is only going to get even better. Let's remember also last year that the secondary was in tatters. I mean, they lost a lot of players on the outside and also Von Miller. But this time they look like they're healthy. You have Micah Hyde back, Jordan Poyer is back. And those are big pieces that they missed last year. And now that you can get after the quarterback, I mean, 9 sacks is a big feat against any offensive line, and they did that on a consistent basis. I mean, Sam Howell was lost out there. And this could be more of what we see. I wouldn't say this bad for the Commanders. This made more sense because they were down by a lot by the Arizona Cardinals. They were down by a lot to the Denver Broncos. And this time they were down by a lot. I mean, they were down 37-0, except the meaningless field goal prevented a shutout, but it wasn't good by any means. And I wasn't going to take their 2-0 performance as something extraordinary. I was appreciative, I acknowledged it, but this made a little bit more sense. Maybe not this bad, but the Commanders, they outperformed their first 2 games, and now they're 2-1. They face the Philadelphia Eagles next week on the road. I think that's going to be partially why they regress to the mean for the foreseeable future. They are solid, they have some pieces, but it's still not enough on a consistent basis because this schedule for the Washington Commanders is surely a gauntlet. But to talk about the Buffalo Bills, even offensively, Stephon Diggs is making somewhat of a homecoming appearance because he grew up in the DMV and went to UMD, go Terps, and he had a pretty good day. I mean, over 100 yards. Great job with breaking down from his original route, getting open for Josh Allen. And then Josh Allen, he had an interception, but that's more like an arm punt to me. I'm not going to really hold that on him for... He threw up a 50-50 ball, gave this guy a shot. Defensive back won that battle. Okay. But there were a lot of times in these rainy conditions, he didn't fight for those extra yards. He took off as a last resort, and they were great runs. 3 carries for 45 yards, a rushing touchdown, and really avoided putting the ball in harm's way. And now the last 2 weeks against the Raiders and now against the Commanders, this is the Josh Allen that I like. This is the Josh Allen that was somewhat in that MVP conversation in 2020, 2021. We'll see. We need to see more. But this could be what the Bills could look like, and they could be getting pieces back slowly but surely. I know it was doom and gloom in that first game against the Jets, but I think now they're starting to find their form. They still have to prove it against these bigger teams, like they have to beat the Bengals again, and they have to play the Kansas City Chiefs. They're known Achilles heel, but let's see what happens. Let's give the Bills a little bit more time to figure things out. And remember, they do have to play Miami twice, so that's another thing as well. But right now, last 2 weeks sample size, it's looking a little better for the Buffalo Bills. It's been a long time since the New York Jets beat the New England Patriots. It's been 8 years now, and the streak has now eclipsed 15 games. It's on a 15-game winning streak. I haven't seen such dominance like this in a long, long time. And unfortunately for the Jets, it just didn't look like it again on Sunday afternoon. Zach Wilson and the offense not together at all. There's a lot of times he's hesitating to make throws, and it's leading to sacks or just the play being broken up. And then once he does get some protection, the receivers aren't getting separation from the defensive backs either. The running game, we talked about, we need to get Breece Hall more touches. He got 12 rush attempts, only 18 yards. That defense for New England is good. They've competed against 2 pretty good offenses to start off the year, and they are not the reason why they're 0-2. But still, that is something to be reckoned with, to shut down the run to that degree. And that's very, very concerning if I'm the New York Jets. If I can't even get my running attack going, that's my only chance of getting offense and helping my young quarterback. And you saw heated tensions last week. Sauce deleted his X account. It's not looking good for New York right now. Yes, they're going to stick with Zach Wilson, and I personally, yes, would stick with Zach Wilson, because you know why? Why would you trade for Kirk Cousins? He is proven to not really get it done, and he's going to probably cost you a first-round draft pick. And you have a conditional right now. It's going to be safe, thankfully. It's going to be your first-round pick for next year. Play this out. This season is over. The season was over 4 snaps in when Aaron Rodgers went down with the Achilles. They weren't going to salvage this season. Zach Wilson, you know what we got in Zach Wilson. You can talk about he's improved and whatnot, but we're seeing that he maybe hasn't. Going against NFL starters is different than the preseason. Going against NFL starters is different when you're doing this in training camp. Zach Wilson is who he is. We have the sample size. Not that good of a quarterback, and that's not to shit on Zach Wilson either. It's just not a good fit. Maybe he needs to change the scenery. He can't handle the pressure, but it doesn't mean that you have to go and find another veteran quarterback, because that takes assets. And also, Kirk Cousins is a stationary target. This offensive line proves that they can't create running lanes and they can't protect the quarterback. He would get killed by all these defensive fronts that are in the AFC. Yes, I know Jets fans are impatient. They like their defense, but this season is over, whether you like it or not. It's not going to be good, and they play the Kansas City Chiefs next year. I wish NBC could flex that game out, because Sunday Night Football has been very uneventful to start off this first month, but we're going to have to endure it. Well, I'll watch it because I have to report here, and it'll be a long season for the Jets fans. Another year with this defense that feels wasted because they don't have adequate quarterback play, but use that pick, bolster the offensive line. Get some other guys too, because you need to sign offensive line depth, because right now what Dwayne Brown and Mekhi Becton and whatever else you have isn't enough. And it's best to get the best young offensive lineman that you can at whatever position you get, and build and protect Aaron Rodgers when he comes back. Jordan Love makes his debut as the Packers' full-time starter, and through the first 2.5 quarters, it wasn't looking too good. There were turnovers, there were miscommunications, and this didn't look like he was on the right page with his receivers or just the offense. There's injuries, no David Bakhtiari, there's no Aaron Jones, just countless injuries. Packers are down 17-0. Now, they were aided by the injury of Derek Carr, who seemed to have hurt his throwing shoulder, not looking good. And that changed the tide. That's a little bit of a pickup for Jordan Love. I don't give asterisk wins or anything, but something to keep a note of. Jordan Love still was able to lead the Packers down 17-0 in the fourth quarter to an 18-17 victory at home. Coming back from 3 possessions is no easy feat, and he did it. Now, there was a time in the fourth quarter they were down 17-3 and couldn't get a red zone score, and I thought maybe that's the game, but hung tough, got the ball back, and a bold call himself to utilize his legs and cut the lead thanks to a 2-point conversion. And that's a bold call by Matt LaFleur. I mean, I personally would have gone to tie it. I personally would have gone for the 1 and just be down 7, because the risk outweighs the benefit, because if you lose that, you're down 8 and opens yourself up to a can of worms. But they got it done. They cut it to 6, and then next touchdown drive allowed them to take the lead. So that gamble worked for Matt LaFleur and the Packers. Their defense got a stop thanks to a late last field goal being missed by the New Orleans Saints, and they held on to go to 2-1. And next week, they play the Detroit Lions at home. That's going to be a really good matchup for Thursday Night Football. I mean, these two teams are up and coming. Both are vying for the division. This winner is going to have the inside track, at least early on, to win the NFC North. I would favor the Detroit Lions just because they've looked better in 3 games, but Jordan Love is looking very good in 3 game sample size so far with the Green Bay Packers. And speaking of Detroit, they bounced back against the Atlanta Falcons. The Falcons were undefeated, 2-0, generating some headlines with that ground game. Detroit said none of that. We're shutting that down. Business is closed. Held them to 41 yards rushing on just 2.2 yards a carry. That defense for Detroit has been a little suspect, especially in run defense. They changed that up this time. They had Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier basically under lock and key, and that forced the Falcons to rely on Desmond Ridder to beat the Detroit Lions, and he unfortunately didn't pass that test. And Detroit, after losing that matchup against Seattle, they cleaned up a lot of mistakes, weren't sloppy with it, and they won comfortably 20-6. Jared Goff looked great, and I talked about Sam Laporta, the tight end, last week. He went from a solid performance to a great performance with the rookie. I mean, just totally beat the Atlanta Falcons defense for a deep touchdown, first ever touchdown in his career. And now that's an extra dimension to this Detroit offense, who has Reynolds, Amon-Ra St. Brown, now Laporta, Jahmyr Gibbs, a great offensive line to give Jared Goff some time. And then you still have Jamison Williams, who is on suspension right now, but who is an unknown commodity that could be another weapon for this Detroit offense. If Detroit can keep this up, I mean, right now the Packers, they look good, but they are missing Aaron Jones. I don't think he'll still be ready for a short week to play the Detroit Lions, so I think they have a really good chance to get ahead of the Packers, get on the inside track for that NFC North crown, and continue to build on this early season momentum that they have right now. The Arizona Cardinals had issues with finishing games, right? They played the Washington Commanders. They were up 20-7, lost that lead, lost the game. They were up 20-0 against the New York Giants, lost that lead, lost the game. This time they raced out to 15-3 and then later a 21-10 halftime lead against the Dallas Cowboys. And this time they finished the job and won 28-16 at home. First win under the Jonathan Gannon era and first win for Joshua Dobbs as well, their new quarterback. Dallas rolled up with 3 new offensive linemen taking over for injuries, and that's a huge thing to keep a note of. That's changing protection schemes, running lanes. But, I mean, Tony Pollard was fine. He found holes. He had a pretty solid day. But Dak didn't look like what he used to be. And this time this was a game that Dak had to win because his team was down. The defense was getting run up and down on. They allowed 200-plus yards on the ground. And that's nothing that Trayvon Diggs can fix because, as we know, unfortunately, Trayvon Diggs tore his ACL in practice last week. He is done for the year. But you still have Micah Parsons. You still have a really good defensive front. And they're great in getting after the quarterback. They had 2 more sacks. But they're not a good run defense. We saw that not just from this game, but when the pass rush can tee off, they can play ahead. That's easy. They can continue to keep on this avalanche of hits, pressure, and forcing a team to pass. But when your team is down, they can still be run on, and that's what happened. And I think for any of these other NFC teams, the Eagles, the San Francisco 49ers, who have good offensive lines, who have good running backs, I would definitely try to run the rock on these Dallas Cowboys. If you can get the pass rush off kilter, you're still going to give up a sack or two. It just matters on where it is, and if you hold on to the ball, because Michael Parsons can rip that thing out and take it back, or at least generate turnovers or interceptions even. This is some tape now to expose what's going on in Dallas. I think offensively, we're seeing now with the passing game, yes, it was good for a little run. We saw a nice drive featuring Michael Gallup. He had 6 catches for 92 yards, but not a lot of CeeDee Lamb in this game other than that 130-yard catch over the shoulder. So this comes back to Dak. Dak had another interception, and this was him just trying to make a play, but it just wasn't there. He threw it right to Kaiser White, who was drawing at Dak early in the game, and then later got the best of him with this interception. So he won the day against Dak Prescott. And the Cardinals now move on to 1-2 on the year. And let's also talk about Josh Dobbs. Josh Dobbs has been a journeyman quarterback throughout his career. He was with the Pittsburgh Steelers, riding the bench behind Ben Roethlisberger, moved around a lot. He had his first couple of starts in Tennessee. Not the best, but that was a very shoddy Tennessee Titans team who had offensive line issues and nobody to pass to adequately on the outside. And Arizona is nothing great either, but at least they have running backs, and at least they have like Marquise Brown, who's a pretty decent receiver. He had a touchdown catch as well. So he was good. He was running as well. Sneaky, fast athlete as well. And I'm not saying that he's anything extraordinary, but this is good to see just these journeyman quarterbacks get some good tape out there. Maybe this is just his audition to locking up a roster spot. He lost the backup job in Cleveland, and that's why he ended up in Arizona. He's the de facto starter until Kyler Murray returns, if and when. And right now, he's making the most of this opportunity. And I love these little underdog stories of Josh Dobbs. He should celebrate this. Jonathan Gannon should celebrate this, a good win. And something to build on, because this team was slated to be tanking this whole year. But remember, players have prideful people too. They want to get their best tape. They'll simply not roll over. So Dallas has some things to work on. And losing to Arizona, of all teams, is a big red flag. I thought they're different, but just when you think they're looking good, they lay an egg like this. Dallas has some things to work on, and yes, they play the New England Patriots next week, and that's a big test because they're built around the running game yet again. You know, Bill Belichick will have some colorful defensive schemes for Dak Prescott, and also just running the ball with former Cowboys running back Ezekiel Elliott and then Stevenson as well. So something to look out for. That defense has some things to work on. Pass rush is fine. Have to work on coverage now without Trayvon Diggs, but also get this run defense secured, because that could lead to a big can of worms later on this season for the Dallas Cowboys. On Monday Night Football, it was a battle between two unbeaten teams in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Philadelphia Eagles, and a kickoff. The temperature was 90 degrees. I know Florida heat can be a thing, but this is at 7 p.m. This humidity down there is next level. But safe to say that the Eagles weren't deterred, being a team from the Northeast. They handled business. They won 25-11, and this is mainly due to their play in the trenches. They have a great defensive line, got after Baker Mayfield, who's had a pretty good start, and I don't think this is just a knock on him. He's going up against a great defense, and he struggled today mainly due to that defensive line. They hit him countless times. They forced him into an interception. They had a strip sack on him and 2 sacks on the day. Just in his face, really shut everything down. And also there was no running game at all. 2.2 yards a carry, 40 total yards in the entire game. On the other side, you have the offensive line for the Philadelphia Eagles opening gaping holes. I mean, they're parting the Red Sea for DeAndre Swift. He just ran straight up the gut, had another 130-yard performance to follow up that 170-yard performance that he had last week. I mean, he's looking really special in this rushing game. Clearly running back one in this depth chart where, yes, you had Kenny Gainwell as the RB1 to start the season, but even without injury, DeAndre Swift looks like the best back in the Eagles backfield at this moment. And they still have to unveil Rashad Penny. I think they're just saving him maybe for the playoffs at this point. Boston Scotty didn't even suit up for this game. They're really deep at running back, and you can just plug and play a running back behind this great offensive line. They gave Jalen time to survey the field, and I think the passing game is still a work in progress. We saw a progressive improvement from week 1 to week 3. Better deep ball passing. You got to see A.J. Brown get involved and squash whatever beef, what people are trying to say between Jalen and A.J. Brown. Very clear that those two guys are best friends, and we're not going to see anything go on for the foreseeable future in this season. A.J. was phenomenal tonight. And there was just a couple miscommunications. I think the first interception by Jalen, it was a misanticipation where the back was supposed to be on that. Also, just the second one was an arm punt in a way where he threw a ball deep towards Devontae Smith, and great play by the quarterback to cut that off, make up that ground. But it was intercepted at the 1 yard line, and it turned into a safety on the next play. So yes, they won the battle but lost the war in that sequence because they gave up a safety on that next play. Going back though to that defensive line, let's talk about Jalen Carter. Again and again, you see him make plays from week to week, but now he had this unbelievable sequence in back-to-back plays. He helped Fletcher Cox, and they split a sack on Baker Mayfield, even forced a fumble. Not sure if he's going to get credit for that in the stat sheet, but ball was dislodged. Bucs recover. Next play, screen pass to Rachaad White. Jalen Carter is about a couple yards beyond the line of scrimmage in the backfield. He makes up that ground, tackles Rachaad White, but also punches at the ball to force a fumble that's recovered by James Bradbury. Eagles turned it into another 3 points to get some breathing room going into halftime. And every time the Bucs had some type of momentum, it was silenced by the defensive line, or also you got to see them just grind it out. In the fourth quarter, Bucs make it a 25-11 game with 9 minutes and 22 seconds left. They don't touch the ball for the rest of the game. That's how insane the Eagles' offensive line controlled the rest of this game. I mean, at this point, the Bucs defense is gassed. This is adding insult to injury right here. I mean, they're steamrolling these poor defensive line, getting long drives and milked every last second off that clock. Unbelievable. And that sucks the soul out of your team. I mean, the Bucs defensive line is something to be reckoned with too. I mean, they have Vita Vea, one of the best nose tackles in the league. The fact that they're getting him off kilter, they're getting them gassed, it just wore them down throughout the game. Yet again, the magic number, I think, for the Eagles, if they eclipse 35 minutes of time in possession, they're going to win those ball games more than not. They basically had a 2-to-1 ratio. That poor Bucs defense was out there for a long time. The Bucs offense didn't really do them too many favors until it was too late. The Eagles are finding ways to win, still not playing or firing on all cylinders just yet. And that's how crazy it could be that they could be even better. They won this game by 2 touchdowns, and Jalen Hurts is still turning over the ball and not making all the best reads, and there is issues with play calling as well from Brian Johnson's end. Imagine if they're getting back to this high-flying offense that we saw. We see it in spurts, but it hasn't been an offensive exhibition just yet. I think we're going to get that maybe next week against Washington. They're going to be back home. They're off to a great start. I mean, you are 3-0, not playing your best ball, but still winning comfortably. And yes, they may not look like Miami or San Francisco at 3-0, but they still are 3-0 against quality opponents, mind you. I don't want to peak in September, October. I want to peak in December going into a playoff run in January. So it's a marathon, not a sprint. Eagles look great despite some issues, but they're right there amongst the other undefeated teams, and I think they'll have a say when it's all said and done at the end of this year. And that's it for this episode of Spectator Sports. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. You guys know what to do. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, take a look at our Instagram and TikTok pages, and you can get the audio from this podcast on Spotify. Links are in the description. Clips you can get as well on YouTube in our playlist. And thank you, Joy, for editing this video. Thank you and goodbye.